The news today, the one-year truce, where does that bring us in the context of the relationship in the between the U.S. and China from a trading perspective before President Trump took office for the second time? Is it back to what it was then, or is there still tension from when from his policies early on?
Look, we have the world's top producer and the world's top consumer meeting, and they both have market power in their own way, and they need each other. And that's what we saw. It was effectively a game of chicken. Trump started it, and Xi stayed in the battle, and both just put on the brakes. I think we're close to pre-Liberation Day tariffs, not necessarily close to where Trump came in. There are a few tweaks because we still have some of the fentanyl tariffs. U.S. firms are still facing this licensing regime on magnets. So there's still some things that are in place, but we're pretty close to the pre-Liberation Day tariffs.
Caroline, what is more significant, what they did talk about or what they didn't talk about, meaning Taiwan, TikTok, Nvidia's high-tech chips, those Blackwell chips, China buying oil perhaps from Russia? Like, there's some really important issues out there that felt like they were missing.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see that going forward. There's going to be ambiguity on all of those difficult issues. But I also think there's market discipline on the worst case scenario of an escalating trade war. So they both realized how much they need each other. The U.S. market is just impossible to replace. We account for 15% of total global imports. There just is no one else who's gonna take that. China accounts for the same 15% of global exports of goods. We can't completely replace China. So the countries have settled the deals that are or in the areas that really matter for them right now for their economies, but we're going to see a lot of ambiguity on those much more complex issues.
So were we played? Were citizens of both countries played? Were investors played? Did we kind of start at point A and go through the whole alphabet and then come back to point A?
Yes. I think Trump has tried the kind of bullying technique, and it's worked with everyone else. Early on, it looked like EU would also retaliate, but they're just too dependent on the U.S. for security, and that's very important right now, so they didn't. China is equivalent to the U.S., and China said, no, we're not going to be bullied. We also have things you absolutely need. And now there's kind of a truce. And I think we'll see this muddling along with market discipline on both sides. It'll hurt the U.S. too much to really do a lot more on China. It'll hurt China too much to do a lot more on the U.S. But in this period of truce, the most important thing is that we work with our allies to develop secure supply chains. So we are not dependent on China for rare earths in the way we are now.
So those allies, including Australia, Canada, where else?
Yeah, exactly. So the agreement with Australia is fantastic, and we should be looking for more agreements like that. Latin America has a lot of rare earths that could be explored that we're part of the Western Hemisphere.
But we have a complicated relationship with some Latin American countries currently.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so the strategy, we can't take on everyone at once. And China really is the biggest competitor, the biggest strategic threat to the U.S. And we should be working to have agreements with countries where we can both pull them out of the China sphere and where they have things we might need.
You couldn't possibly be thinking about the U.S. shooting on Venezuelan ships, could you?
Thinking about that, I'm thinking about, I'm absolutely thinking about that.
It's funny, not funny, right?
But I'm also thinking about Argentina.
Yeah, exactly.
It's complicated in a different way.
Well, Caroline, and I do think about the U.S.'s position in the world at large. Like, we still have trade agreements to be worked out with what used to be a big friend of ours called Canada. And yet that is still up in the air. How does the rest of the world feel about the United States right now? against China? Because I do feel like there is this thinking about China domination. And so people trying to do alliances to combat that. So is the U.S., as we see it, do that deal with Australia and maybe reaching out, realizing it can't do things alone? Are things changing a little bit in terms of the U.S. perception by the rest of the world?
You know, I hope so. And I think if Trump leans into these agreements where countries haven't retaliated and goes forward in a respectful way, we could see that, and we could see a lot more cooperation. But the problem is that so far the U.S. has proven to be a kind of unreliable trade partner. Deals are made and then we back off from them, and then new threats come up, and that's really problematic. So I think there's a lot of distrust, a lot of dislike with the U.S., and that's going to be a hurdle to overcome. At the same time, other countries need the U.S. market. Again, we're the world's top consumer, and they need the defense from the U.S. So they will play, but it will work a lot better if we work on cooperative agreements than purely in this kind of bullying mentality.